In order to find success in your life, you're going to have to focus on one thing. It's not focusing on your fear or what's preventing you or holding you back. It's not focusing on faith where you're ultimately hoping you will go. It's focusing on what you believe about yourself. Let's talk about what you believe about yourself, and I'll tell you that's where you're going to end up in your life and in your business. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about something that I've already spoken a little bit about, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about this concept of being fearful versus being afraid. I talked a little bit about this, and I talked about the steps of fear before, because there really are two great emotions in the human body. There's love and there's fear. We're either chasing something, we're pursuing something that's a love-based emotion, or we're running from something that's a fear-based emotion. And I think it's really important for us to understand fear, because fear is one of the greatest motivators in life. It is also the one great negative motivator. And there's a greater motivator than fear itself, and that's love. And we're not necessarily going to go down the path of love or fear. What we're going to talk about is what to do when I'm fearful. What to do when I'm afraid, what to do when I'm scared. And there's various levels of this. But I want to go back to one of the stories that I love to tell, which is the story of Alexander the Great. I've actually traveled the world in pursuit of Alexander the Great. I've been to Macedonia, where he was born. I've been to the city of Alexandria, Egypt, where he settled it. He thought it was the most beautiful place on the planet. And there's still a statue in his name by the libraries of Alexandria. I have been to places in Africa where he conquered, and I've seen a lot of the conquest of Alexander. And I'm fascinated by him for one reason. And if you actually read my book, The Titan Doctrine, I speak a lot about this in the first chapter, where I talk about our ability to overcome fear. And Alexander was born roughly 350 BC. He's born in Macedonia, and he is really heir to the Greek Empire. He has a father that's leading. He has a mother that is not like a normal mother. She has elements of a normal mother, but she's different. In that most mothers have an elevated view or vantage point for their child. Have you ever met a mother who you can not tell them that their child has ever done anything wrong because you just couldn't convince them otherwise, right? Like that mom that's like, nope, my son or daughter's perfect. They're the greatest thing ever. She takes it to a different level. She actually believes that what is born of her is deity. She thinks that somehow she has birthed a god. And she starts telling Alexander that as a baby and starts whispering into his ear that he is deity. Could you imagine telling a 2-year-old that they're a god and they're invincible? Like most 2-year-olds already have that vantage point, like they are the supreme being in the universe and everything revolves around them. Well, she echoed that, where she took the terrible 2s into the terrible 20s, because Alexander actually believed he was a god. But this played into his favor, because when she told him he was a god, she also told him that no one could take his life unless it was also deemed by the gods. And why Alexander was so reckless with his passions, his desires, his conquest, was because he really thought he was a god. He really thought that there was nothing that someone could take from him that wasn't sovereign. And this is important, because if you could imagine a construct by which you live your life, that you think that nothing can be taken from you except for what is sovereign in nature, meaning that you cannot be destroyed, you cannot be beaten, you cannot be killed, you cannot be wounded or hurt, in any way, unless it's literally deemed by the gods, because you are a god yourself. What impact would it have on this world? And I can tell you the impact it had on this world, because that's Alexander the Great. And the reason I'm so fascinated with this character is because I don't know if there's another human that's ever lived on the planet that has lived in that fashion, where they actually believe that their life could not be taken from them. They actually could live in whatever way they deemed possible. Their passions raw and unfettered, their desires undiminished, their pursuits just like unrelenting. And to me, like it's a fascinating story because he conquers the known world. And then, ironically, he dies before it's ever incorporated, meaning he actually never, while he conquered the whole world, he actually never enjoyed the conquest of the world that he conquered. But his battles are legendary because he did something that no one else would do. He lived without fear. So he would ride out in front while arrows are being shot at him because they believed that they could take down the leader, that they would destroy the advance of the army. All eyes are focused on Alexander, and he's riding out front with sword in hand and taking on armies with his people. But not only did he, somehow survive that, his men saw it in a way where all of a sudden they believed that he was a god. Like they started to think the way he thought. He carried with him this just unfettered, unparalleled ability to run into the craziest situations. But with that, he got the undying support of his men. There's so many great stories of Alexander. One of my favorite ones is a king that's refusing to allow him into the walls, into the city, and Alexander standing on the cliff next to the city in demonstration of how great his army is, tells that king, he said, just understand that we will not stop until you're conquered. You might as well give up. And the king says, I'm not going to give up. I have walls, I have, moats, I have, doors, like you're not going to get through. And Alexander starts to command his men to start walking off the cliff. And one by one, his army is marching off the cliff. And then he stops and he says, just understand that my men will stop at nothing. When that display impacted this king so much, he actually opened up his doors and allowed Alexander to come in. And Alexander, in justification, said, I lost way fewer men by having a few march off of a cliff than to actually go into war. But you think about like just the audacity of someone like him. And to me, that's a really fascinating place to live, to think about, to explore. Like, what would my life be like if I wasn't afraid of going bankrupt or being killed or being rejected, or, like you start thinking about all the fears, what would you do? What mountain would you climb? What feat would you attempt today? Like, I'm in my 40s. Like, I don't even want to go, play basketball with young guys anymore. It's like for the fear of losing or looking like an idiot, right? Like, I mean, think about like all the little things that fear really, kind of pervades in our life. And I want to make some clear distinctions here because I think it's important to understand that that there is a difference between types of fear. I would say the first type of fear that I'm going to outline is the fear that causes us to be afraid. Typically, with being afraid causes a paralyzation, right? Like, have you ever been called into the bedroom of your child when they're telling you that a monster is under the bed, right? And you're like, why do you believe this monster is under the bed? Well, I heard something. And in their imagination, there's a monster under the bed. It literally takes a flashlight or you leaning down and looking under the bed going, okay, there's no monster under the bed. Are we good? But why can't they climb out of the bed themselves to look under there, right? And it's because they're afraid. And afraid, I would just say, creates the paralyzation. It's this, it's, kind of fight or flight, but it's like there's also in between there this place of just being so terrified, so afraid that you can't move. The second one, what I would just call being scared, which is a lesser version of fear, but does not necessarily cause paralyzation. Being scared, you can still move forward. The conversation that I have with my children, and I have 3 boys, and especially my youngest, is you can be scared, but we need to be careful not to be afraid. Afraid is the paralyzation where I cannot move forward. Scared is a feeling that I feel that I'm willing to combat, right? And I just make that distinction in my own life and also, in the lives of others, my kids, those that I lead, is that now what word comes to mind when you talk about overcoming fear, like being scared? And it's this word called courage. Courage is the ability to move forward, even when the thoughts of fear are present, when we're scared. Oftentimes when I talk to my 10-year-old, it's you can be scared, but you're not allowed to be afraid. Afraid causes paralyzation. Scared means I'm going to deal with the feelings, the emotions of fear that I have, but I'm not going to allow it to affect me from moving forward. Most people in life can use fear in a positive way as long as they combat it with courage. I would say there's a step past just courage. And courage, so like we're going to kind of go on this paradigm. So afraid would be kind of like step number one. And that's being so fearful that we get paralyzed and we can't move. The next phase, what I would say, is just being scared. And being scared is like having the effect of fear on my life. And the next step would be having courage. So that's now taking the weight of being scared and still pressing forward, even though there's thoughts of fear. And then there's the ultimate step, which is what I would call faith, which faith is now taking steps in courage when fear is present, with a belief that something better is ultimately going to be the result of my action. Courage is actually taking the action. Faith is a step beyond, where I'm actually believing that there's going to be a positive or a good or proper outcome because of the steps I'm taking. Faith is oftentimes described or defined as the substance of things hoped for when the evidence isn't seen. The substance of things hoped for, but the evidence isn't seen. So, there's a faith that is an actionable piece, right? It's courage in action tied to your belief system is where faith then is created, that then allows the hope to set in for what the future will be. What we have to do as humans, whether we're dealing with our 10-year-old and a monster under the bed, or we're dealing with whatever situation you're in, you just found out a medical diagnosis that didn't go your way. You just found out that you didn't get the contract in business that you really hoped for all year. I'll give you for instance, we had an Aspire event in Nashville, probably one of the worst events we've ever put on. We put on some events that were rough. Nashville was probably the worst, mainly because we just didn't have a lot of people show up. We're used to seeing 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, and right around 1,000 showed up, and we had to beg, borrow, steal, pay our relatives to come to that event, right? Like it was one of those events that was just really, really difficult. Afraid would say, oh man, we should not do any more events. We are not great at events. It's over. Let's not move forward. Scared is saying, okay, we may have failed and we may fail again, but we're still going to press forward to take another step towards doing that same type of business. Courage would be where the investment comes in of like, I'm actually going to institute, some blood, sweat, tears, something of value into the progress. And faith is scheduling the entire year of 2025 out with the expectation of something amazing going to come. Most people live over here in this place of going back and forth between what we would call just being scared and courage. And we teeter between the two. Can we overcome our fear enough that we take a step? There's a different group of people out there that operate in faith. And those are the ones that change the world. As I look at Alexander, if you could go back to how I described Alexander the Great, I talked about how he just lived life without fear. Now, he had an unfair advantage, right? Like he was told lies that he somehow believed that, Mom, if you could go back and tell me those lies, when I was growing up, maybe it would help me out a lot too. Or maybe I would have died in my 20s like Alexander. I'm not sure, but maybe, you never know. But I think that if you look at what he actually was doing was he was operating in faith. Now, I want to break down one more construct because to me, that's what I love. That's what this podcast is all about. The reason I do these podcasts is because I love helping people grow. The whole purpose of this podcast, the reason I do it on a weekly basis is because I would love to mentor and coach people, and I don't get to. And so I spend an hour in the studio every week coaching and mentoring from this seat because it's what I want to do. I want to help you. But if you don't understand these concepts, you'll never move into a place of true success. This is the success I felt in my life, is moving from not being afraid when everybody else won't take action, not just being scared and then finding courage to take action, but actually taking action at a level that some would say is unreasonable or unsustainable. And that's because I believe in a better opportunity, a better day tomorrow. That's where faith comes in. When I talk about that, I do want to get back to one word, and I want to define it because there's the central piece that literally is the red thread that goes from afraid to faith. And that's the red thread that I would call the word belief. There is a very, very different way of thinking when it comes to your beliefs or your belief system or how you believe. And I was recently listened to someone speak on this topic, and it was fascinating. And he said that as Americans, when someone tells you a truth, most of us will say something like, "Oh, I believe that." And what we're saying is I concur, I agree, or I mentally ascend to the truth that you position for me. I'll agree with it. Most times when we say we believe, what we're saying is, I agree. Belief is different. Belief is the ability and the willingness to concur and agree with truth and take action on it. When someone says they believe, but they refuse to take action, they don't believe, they just agree. Belief is something different. I was watching the Michael Jordan documentary, one of my favorite. I love that 9-part series. It was amazing, right? Like when during the COVID, the pandemic, I think that was like my most favorite thing that happened was they put out the Michael Jordan documentary every week. And he said this phrase, he said, "I was a big believer in Phil Jackson." If you go back to Michael Jordan before Phil Jackson, the coach, right? Michael Jordan, famous coach, Phil Jackson puts the Bulls together, literally takes that same system, puts the Lakers together with Kobe and Shaq. Phil Jackson, one of the most amazing coaches in history, had a very specific way of doing basketball, had a very different way of thinking, created a new offense, so on and so forth. But what Michael Jordan was saying was, now, he had a coach before Phil Jackson, of which he didn't win championships, right? And with Phil Jackson, he wins championships, right? And it's interesting that he used the phrase, I'm a big believer in Phil Jackson, because what Michael Jordan was saying was, now he arguably was the greatest basketball player that ever lived. And I actually don't even think it's arguable. I think it's just a fact. But I think Michael Jordan, being the greatest basketball player that ever lived, could ultimately say to just about anybody, I'm the greatest that ever was, just follow me. He believed so much in Phil Jackson that he put his skills, strengths, abilities in the hands of a person because his belief system. Now, did Michael Jordan believe in himself? Yes. But he believed in Phil Jackson so much that he was willing to follow the playbook and accept the outcomes. Now, obviously, he made a good choice because they won multiple championships. There's a huge difference between belief and agreement. The things that you say you believe today, are you actually willing to take action on? Because belief and faith become synonymous. You cannot take actions or steps of faith in something you do not believe. You have to go back to the fundamental roots of what you believe in order to actually create steps of faith. I'll give you a for instance, and then I'll kind of give you some final thoughts here. Do you believe that that you deserve success? Do you believe that you deserve it? Do you believe that you're capable of it? What do you believe about you and success? Based on whatever you believe, I can ultimately tell you what your belief system is by the behaviors of your life. In the end, most of your behaviors do not show that there is a faith tied to your belief or that your belief is actually improper. I think it's more important for you to deal with what you believe, because then naturally you'll take steps that go from fear with paralyzation all the way to steps well beyond anyone thinks is reasonable. What's holding you back? I actually think what's holding you back is between the ears. I think it's what you believe about yourself. What you believe about yourself will ultimately dictate the outcome of your life. If you are just striving and straining for something greater, but you don't believe that you're capable, you don't believe that you're worthy, you don't believe that you're valuable enough to actually have success, it doesn't matter what steps of faith you're going to take, because you're going to take them with a predispositioned step that will ultimately lead to failure. Your faith can only be exercised beyond where you believe. When you go back to why you're paralyzed today, so many of you have reached out on the podcast, you've hit me up on social, and you talk about, I just want to get started. I want to take this step. I want to do this thing. I want to move to this place of success. I will tell you that it all comes down to what you believe about yourself. What do you believe about yourself? That's where you should start, because what you believe about yourself will be the limiter in everything. Believing is more than just a mental agreement. It's rather a mental agreement that is exercised by following or walking in that agreement. I'm going to read that one more time. Believing is more than just a mental agreement. Believing is more than just saying, yeah, I agree, I do deserve success. Believing is more than just saying, I am capable of success. Rather, it is a mental agreement that is exercised by following or walking in that agreement. What step today will you take when all maybe you have is courage to move past being scared? Maybe it's, you know what, I'm going to step out and do this thing. I'm going to start this business. I'm going to, whatever it is, I can't tell you how many people have watched my journey of starting a nonprofit and they go, I'm going to start a nonprofit one day. Why not today? What's preventing you from stopping a nonprofit to make an impact on someone else's life today? What is it? I think that many of you don't believe that you're capable. You don't believe you're capable of raising money, of having enough time, of whatever it is. There's a belief problem. And that belief problem is rooted in fear. And that fear is that you're not enough. You don't have the ability. You're not going to have the resources. You've failed in some other area, so therefore the failure is imminent in what's happening. What if we could move past fear today and move into courage? One step. And then in that step, prove to ourselves that we believe differently, and then transcend into acts of faith, the substance of things hoped for, even when the evidence isn't seen. I don't know if I'm going to be a success, but I'm hoping for it, and therefore I'm going to continue to keep taking steps towards what I believe about myself, because ultimately it's going to come true. That's faith, right? One really good example about people that are in bondage to fear, and I would say that most people that are listening to this podcast, it's not just that you're in bondage, like you're actually in slavery, like you are enslaved to fear. Fear has you so bound up that you can't even, you're so paralyzed. And I'll give you an example. We've been working in Pakistan to free people that work in the brick factories. There's what's called a debtor's prison in Pakistan, where for generations people can be enslaved based on a debt that they owe. And so now they live at this brick factory, and sometimes for generations working. And it's not just the mom or the dad, it's typically the mom, the dad, it's the children. And the system is rigged against them, where no matter how much they try to work and overcome the debt, they can never work enough to overcome the debt. The debt is always compounding. So there's literally thousands of families enslaved in northern Pakistan, and we've been working to set some free. I remember the first person I ever came in contact with where this was presented to me, and I began to talk to the man. And the person who owned the brick factory was willing for me to pay for someone's freedom. And the payment for freedom for this family, which was 8 people, was less than $4,000. And so just like to think about that, like you're standing there for $4,000, I can set this family for free. Well, as I began to talk to the man and ask him, he first of all said, well, my family has been enslaved in this brick factory for 3 generations. I've never known anything else. I was born here. My parents were born here. My father was born here. He said, I'm just a byproduct of this place. And I said, what if you could have freedom? And he said, I don't know what I would do with it. I don't know how to provide for my family. I don't know how to get food. I don't know how to work a job. I've never done anything other than work in this brick factory. It provides everything for me. It provides clothing. It provides food. And in the end, it took a couple of weeks to convince him that I would not fail him, that I would take care of him, that I would pay for his family's food, that I would make sure they had shelter. In the end, it's a beautiful story because it was our very first one where we ended up buying him a little taxi, and little motorcycle taxi to provide for his family, taught his wife to sew. They're a fully self-sustaining family now. It's really incredible with their 6 children. And we've been freeing a lot of people up there, but by and large, more people tell me, no, I don't want freedom, than people that tell me, yes, I'll take this step. And I feel like it's a parallel to the people I come in contact with every single day. I really don't think there's any difference between most people here that say, I really want this in my life. And I say, well, this is what you have to give up in order to get there. But they're not willing to actually possess freedom because the slavery, the bondage, the entrapments are so much more comfortable. And you look at that as such a fear-based action that holds us back. There's so many parallels to that as I look at it. I used to travel and teach at a lot of college universities, and I would say this phrase all the time because I knew that these kids were going to face it. I would say the life that you ultimately want is going to cost you the one that you have. You're going to have to give up the things that make you feel good today to get to what you actually want tomorrow. And that's essentially what I have to say to these people in Pakistan is you actually have to give this up. Like, you can't come work at the brick factory tomorrow if I pay for your freedom. We're going to have to give you the life you want. And oftentimes the only way for me to get them there is to get them to dream. It's where faith comes in. It's the hope side. Can I get them to hope in something else? For them, I said, what if you owned your own home? Like, what if you could have your own place? What if instead of only eating whatever is provided for you, you had a choice tomorrow? What if you got to go to the market? And think about this. These are the things I'm saying to this man. What if you got to go to the market tomorrow and there's 3 types of bread and you get to pick whichever one you want? What if you decided, hey, I want, they eat a lot of goat there, but like instead of goat today, I'm gonna eat a chicken, right? Like whatever it is, like they've never had those thoughts in their entire life, And I think sometimes it's the reprogramming that we need. Like, what if? And some people, in order to get to this place of faith, need to sit down and dream about what's possible. What if you had more than one choice? What if you didn't have to work this 9-to-5 job? What if you actually got to do the thing you loved every single day, right? Like, what does that look like? And dream about it. Think about it. I'm a big fan of vision boards and writing stuff down. I have a whiteboard where I work out, and I'm always writing stuff down. And usually it's my incoherent thoughts about whatever I'm dreaming about. Like in that moment, usually when I'm working out, I just want to dream. I just want to think about what would I create and what would I build and what would be bigger than what I'm doing now. And I'll just write those thoughts down. And you can revert back to the episode where I talk about refining your impulses. But I do think that some of our fear can be overcome by dreaming, by thinking about that hope, because faith has a component of hope. And unless you can get to a place of hope, it really is hard to take that ultimate step of faith.
I loved it. I don't know if I want to keep this in the pod, but can I share something personal?
Mm-hmm.
Every time we record, I feel like I'm being called to repentance in a good way.
Yeah.
In a very good way.
Let me ask, the word repentance, I would define that as a change in belief that results in a change of direction.
Yeah, it's if you have the knowledge, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to do something about it? And like the impulse one and the ideas one, I walked out of there just feeling, I was like, no, like, because I am the biggest. I have an idea, I throw it out there, I get an adrenaline dump or like a dopamine hit from just expressing it, and then it never comes to fruition. Like in my friend group, I dream, let's do this, let's do that, and I've been really irresponsible with that for the last 30 years, 30 plus years. But fear has been on my mind the last 2 weeks, and I've had like a ruthless introspection on it. I was down in Fort Lauderdale in like Millionaire's Way. I was at my cousin's in-laws' house. He sold his company for $250 million. He's taking that and just compounding it.
Sure.
So he's made it.
Yeah.
And his house is like mind-blowing. The things he's worried about is mind-blowing to me. And I'm sitting there and I get to see this firsthand. I get to have Thanksgiving in his home, watch how he lives. And I talked to my cousin who's almost in this position where money isn't an option anymore. I'm like, hey, like if we didn't have time and money, like what would you be doing right now? And we talked about it for a long time, and I kind of got scared because I realized two things. One, I didn't fully know. I had some vague idea, nothing actionable. And then two, a lot of the reasons why I'm not doing them right now are kind of not real.
Yeah.
And then I came home and I'm having these thoughts, and I talked to my wife, and I was like, I think I've lived my life for other people up and down. Like I curate playlists of music, not because of I like
for someone else,
because I think someone will hear them and be like, that sounds, and just like every action is kind of dictated by that. So I've been like really parsing that out. So just walking into this episode is like kind of what I needed to hear.
Yeah. I love that. I love, I think that that's a really great exercise. Because ultimately, you know, my father used to say, the people who chase money the hardest will be the people that money always eludes. Right? There's something about setting your sight on money as the ultimate, you know, have that ultimately prevents most people from having it. And I think oftentimes when you take the construct of what is normal for us to create success, you said, what if all I had was like, what was the phrase? It was like, what didn't have like
time and money,
right? Around there. Like if I had as much time as I wanted and I had, and there was unlimited amounts of money, right? The two resources that it really takes to accomplish something in this life, right? I love that to me, because what you've just done is you've stepped into the true reasons for why you don't do what you know you're supposed to be doing, or you feel called, or you feel, you know, at least inspired to do. And I like having that conversation. I'll say that oftentimes with business owners is like, what if money wasn't the issue? And because I've been known for being wealthier, have had enough success that they think like it's like they get a glimpse into, and money is always an issue, right? Like it's like the reason I started this entire collective influence was because I wanted to give more money away. Like money was still a limiter. Like you could sell a company for $1 billion and still want to go do something bigger in the world. Like there's always something bigger, greater. And it's like your cousin. It's like, you know, there will always be limitations. And it's like, but if you remove the limitations, then you actually start seeing what limitations are tied to fear versus physical, real limitations, right? Like, yeah, I would love to go feed 1 billion people. Well, you know, that's going to take money. Okay, well, what if I had all the money in the world? What's missing now, right? Like, oh, well, there's my real fear. You know, like the real fear is tied to, can I build something big enough? Can it be organized well enough? Can I, have enough people that'll buy into the vision to actually go work and do? And it's like the real fear is usually behind the need for resources, for sure. It's really good.
That's kind of where I was getting to. Was I have my what ifs. I played that game over the weekend. Mm-hmm. You played that game in Pakistan with this family. Right. Like, what if chicken or goat?
Right.
And I was going to ask you and someone in your stature, in your position, like, what are your what ifs? Mm-hmm. I think you kind of just answered it.
Yeah, I did. I mean, like it goes back to, I am ultra organized. I love building big organizations. I love scaling things. Oftentimes, the thing we pursue and do the most often is tied to some subconscious limitation that exists there. And I think where I still question myself the most is, can you build something that big? Can you actually do it across multiple continents? Can you, we're in 108 countries, so it's obvious I can, right? But there's a fear tied to it, like, will I be taken advantage of? Will I find the right people? Will enough people buy into the vision, right? Like, it's not money, or because ultimately, like, there is something to be said about if you build it, they will come. Like, if I actually built a global operation, which I have, and then people ultimately buy into it and give, which they are ironically starting to do, right? So like, is my limitation ever money or time? No, it never is. And so I'm just curious today, what would you do? And this is what I want from you today. I want you to respond to me. I want you to respond on this podcast. I want you to respond on social. And I want to be the biggest cheerleader you've ever had when it comes to moving past a place of lacking belief in yourself to moving into belief so you can begin to overcome fear through courage. And then what steps of faith are you going to take based on what you know that you are destined and called to do? Alexander the Great, when he would ride out into the expanses of battle, thousands and maybe tens of hundreds of thousands of people against him, he rode out in complete faith because he actually was not thinking about success today. He was thinking about the empire that was being built. Every step of the horse's hooves was pushing towards where he believed he was headed, which was a world empire where he could pull together, and some of it was altruistic and some of it was maybe a motivator that we would not say is a positive motivator. He wanted world conquest and domination. But whatever it is, in the end, every step of the horse's hoof was a progression towards what he believed was ultimately going to happen because it was what he believed about himself. Change the belief about yourself. Push towards what you've been called to do. I believe that every one of us have some calling on our life. I believe that you have something to accomplish. I believe that there is some plan laid out for you that is bigger and grander and more amazing than you could ever think. And I want you to take a step in courage today, moving towards that place of faith. And I want to be along for the journey. I want to be along for the ride. And I want to be your biggest cheerleader as you step on to doing bigger things as you believe better about yourself. Thanks so much for being a part of the podcast and for listening today. I'd love to connect with you further, and you can connect with me on social media at Eddie Wilson Official on any of the social media channels.